Esther was the Persian name of a young Jewish woman whose Hebrew name was Hadassah. She was born into a family who had been carried away captive with Jeremiah about 600 BC. When her parents died, she came under the guardianship of Mordecai, a relative. It appears he was a cousin. They lived in Shushan, the Persian royal city, and Mordecai sat in the king's gate. King Ahasuerus, who reigned from India to Ethiopia over 127 provinces, and is the Darius of Daniel 6:1, who reigned over 127 provinces, had a huge banquet in his palace at Shushan in the 3rd year of his reign. After having all his princes and nobles as guests for 180 days, he had a feast for all the people that were present at the palace for 7 days. And Vashti the queen made a feast for all the women in the royal house. On the 7th day, when the king was merry with wine, he commanded that Queen Vashti be brought before the king wearing the royal crown, so the people could see how beautiful she was. The queen refused to come at the king's command, and he divorced her at the advice of Memucan, his adviser, saying, "If you don't do this, all the women of the kingdom will despise their husbands." After things settled down, Ahasuerus remembered Vashti and missed her, but he could not rescind his new command that all women were to give honor to their husbands, and the husbands were to rule in their own houses. So the king's servants suggested that all the beautiful young virgins in the kingdom be brought to the palace and given their days of purification so they could be brought before the king. Esther, being a beautiful young virgin in the kingdom, was brought to the palace and placed in the custody of Hegai, keeper of the women, until her time to be presented before the king. Each woman spent 1 year being purified. That is, they spent 6 months with oil of myrrh and 6 months with sweet odors and other things for the purifying of the women. The virgin chosen to go to the king in the evening was allowed to choose anything she wanted to dress herself up to go into the king. The next morning she would go to the second house of the women, which was the house of the concubines, and she would see the king no more unless he requested it. When it was Esther's appointed time to go to the king, she asked for nothing more than what Hegai had given to her, and she obtained favor in the sight of all them that looked upon her. So Esther was taken to the king, and he loved her above all the women, and set the royal crown upon her head, and made her queen instead of Vashti. And Mordecai told her not to tell anyone that she was Jewish. In those days that Mordecai sat at the king's gate, he overheard 2 of the king's chamberlains make plans to kill the king. So Mordecai told Esther, and she told the king. Then the 2 men were hanged, and the king had it written in the chronicles of the king. Sometime later the king promoted Haman, who despised the Jews, to a high position, and all the king's servants reverenced and bowed before Haman as the king had spoken. But Mordecai would not bow to Haman or show reverence to him, which infuriated Haman. So when he found out that Mordecai was a Jew, he set out to destroy all the Jews. He convinced King Ahasuerus that the Jews were not a good people and should be killed because they wouldn't keep the king's laws. This sounded good to Ahasuerus, so he allowed Haman to send letters to all the provinces that they should kill the Jews on the 13th day of the 12th month, which is the month of Adar. When Mordecai and the Jews heard this, there was much fasting, praying, and wailing. Esther's maids heard about this and told her, and she sent to get word from Mordecai concerning this. He sent to her a copy of the decree that Haman had sent out, and he told her that she must go to the king and make a request to him for herself and all the Jews. Esther knew that to go before the king when he had not requested could cost her her life. But Mordecai told her, "For if you altogether hold your peace at this time, then shall deliverance arise to the Jews from another place, but you and your father's house shall be destroyed, and who knows whether you are come to the kingdom for such a time as this. This is probably the key statement in the book of Esther. When God has a plan and he chooses someone to carry it out, his plan will not be thwarted. If the first person he chooses will not accept the offer, he will choose someone else to carry it out. Esther was to go before the king and try to stop the Jews from being killed, for the king did not know what he had done. Esther requested the king and Haman attend a banquet she would have prepared. She did this twice. During this time, the king couldn't sleep and ordered the reading of some historical records, which just so happened to be about an assassination plot against the king. Mordecai had exposed this plot to Esther, who had told the king, and the king's life had been spared. The king desired to honor this man who had saved his life, but Haman's vanity caused him to believe he himself was about to be honored by the king. But it was, in fact, Mordecai, the very man he hated the most, who received the honor. At the evening banquet, it was made known to the king that Haman was trying to kill off all the Jews, including Queen Esther. The king had Haman hanged on the gallows he had built for Mordecai. Then the king made another decree that all the Jews on a day appointed could kill their enemies who were trying to kill them. To this day, the Jews honor this day now called Purim.